The gasps reached her before the whispers did. Calanthe Faircloth stood frozen at the top of the Montclair ballroom staircase, 200 faces tilted upward like pale flowers tracking a dying sun. Crystal chandeliers blazed above her, merciless in their illumination, casting light on every jagged edge where her hair now ended just below her ears. 3 hours ago, it had fallen to her waist. 18 years of careful tending, of her mother's brushing and braiding before the fever took her, of the only beautiful thing Calanthe possessed in a house that had slowly stripped her of everything else. Gone. Her hand trembled at her side, fighting the urge to touch the ragged ends. She could still feel the cold bite of the shears against her neck, could still hear Lady Sibylla's voice, soft as crushed velvet, saying, "There now, darling. We can't have you outshining Venetia at her own debut, can you? It would be unseemly." The footman who'd announced her name had already retreated, leaving Calanthe stranded at the precipice like a sacrifice offered to hungry gods. She should descend. She should flee. She should do something other than stand here, while 200 members of London's finest society catalogued her humiliation with glittering, delighted eyes. "Good heavens," someone murmured, not quite quietly enough. What happened to the Faircloth girl? Illness, perhaps? They say consumption takes the hair. No, look at the edges. That was done deliberately. How barbaric. The whispers swirled and multiplied, a poison spreading through the perfumed air. Calanthe searched the crowd desperately for any friendly face, for anyone who might offer sanctuary from this nightmare. She found none. Instead, she found her stepmother. Lady Sibylla stood near the refreshment table, resplendent in burgundy silk, her expression arranged into perfect maternal concern. Beside her, Venetia preened in white and pearls, her honey gold hair cascading in elaborate ringlets that caught the light like a taunt. They watched Calanthe with identical expressions of barely concealed triumph. "Move," she commanded herself. "Move, or they win completely." She forced her foot onto the first step, then the second. Her borrowed gown, a cast-off of Venetia's from 3 seasons past, suddenly felt like armor made of paper. The ivory silk had been beautiful once, but now it only emphasized how wrong everything else was. The wrong hair, the wrong girl, the wrong life. Halfway down, she heard it. 15,000 a year, and Ashworth Manor besides. They say he's refused every match his aunt has proposed. The Duke of Vexley? Here tonight? I thought he never attended these affairs. Apparently, Lady Augusta insisted. She's desperate to see him settled before the season ends. Calanthe didn't care about dukes. She cared about surviving the next 30 seconds without her legs giving way. But the name rippled through the ballroom like wind across water, heads turning toward the far corner where shadows gathered thick and heavy. She didn't look, couldn't afford the distraction. 3 more steps. 2. 1. Her slippers touched the marble floor, and she released a breath that felt like surrender. Now what? The crowd had parted around her, leaving a radius of empty space as though her misfortune might be contagious. Calanthe stood in that island of isolation, spine straight, chin lifted, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Her mother had taught her that much before she died. Dignity costs nothing, my love. And sometimes it's all we have left. She turned toward the terrace doors, seeking escape, and walked directly into a wall of black wool and cedar and something darker she couldn't name. "Forgive me," she gasped, stumbling backward. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her with impersonal efficiency. "I wasn't watching where I—" The words died in her throat. He was tall. That was her first impression. Tall and broad-shouldered in evening clothes that fit like they'd been sewn directly onto his frame. Dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved rather than born, all sharp angles and shadowed planes. A jaw that could cut glass, cheekbones that caught the chandelier light like blades. but it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Gray. Not the soft gray of morning mist or dove feathers. This was the gray of storm clouds before lightning struck, of slate cliffs overlooking violent seas. They assessed her with an intensity that made her feel dissected, catalogued, and filed away in some mental archive she would never access. "You're in my way," he said. His voice was low, cool, utterly without inflection. I apologize, Your Grace." The title slipped out before she could stop it. She didn't know for certain that he was the Duke of Vexley, but something in his bearing announced it. The unconscious authority. The way the crowd had subtly reorganized itself around his movements without him acknowledging their existence. One dark eyebrow rose fractionally. "You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are." The words came out sharper than intended, edged with the hysteria she was barely containing. "The most eligible bachelor in England, 15,000 a year, refuses every match. You're the evening's other spectacle. We should form a traveling show." Silence. Calanthe felt the blood drain from her face. Had she actually just said that? To a duke? To the Duke of Vexley, who was now staring at her like she'd sprouted a second head? "I should go," she whispered. "I'm so terribly sorry. I'm not myself this evening. Your hair." She flinched as though he'd struck her. "Someone cut it." It wasn't a question. His slate-colored gaze moved over the ragged edges with clinical precision. "Recently, within the last few hours, judging by how the ends haven't yet begun to curl naturally. And you didn't do it yourself. The angle is wrong. Someone else held the shears." Calanthe's throat closed. Of all the responses she'd expected, of all the mockery and pity she'd steeled herself against, this cold analysis was somehow worse. He'd reduced her humiliation to evidence, her pain to a puzzle. "Yes," she managed. "Someone else held the shears." "Who?" "I don't see how that's any of your concern, Your Grace." Those winter sky eyes returned to hers, and something flickered in their depths. Interest, perhaps, or irritation. With a face that controlled, it was impossible to tell. "You're right," he said. "It isn't." He stepped around her and walked away without another word. Calanthe stood there, trembling, humiliated, and somehow more confused than she'd been before. The crowd buzzed with fresh speculation, eyes darting between her and the Duke's retreating back. She could feel Lady Sibylla's gaze burning into her from across the room, could feel the weight of Venetia's smug satisfaction. She needed to escape, needed to think, needed to— "Miss Faircloth!" A new voice, feminine and bright, appeared at her elbow. "Don't look so frightened. My brother has that effect on everyone. It's really quite exhausting. I'm Lady Tamsin Vane, and I believe you're exactly what I've been looking for. The Duke's sister. Here." Smiling at her like they were old friends. Calanthe opened her mouth to respond, but Lady Tamsin was already linking their arms and steering her toward a private alcove, chattering cheerfully about the dreadful quality of the champagne and the unfortunate fashion choices of the Countess of Pemberton. Behind them, Calanthe caught one last glimpse of the Duke of Vexley. He was watching, and he didn't look away. The alcove was small and shadowed, tucked between two marble columns, where the candlelight didn't quite reach. Lady Tamsin pressed Calanthe into a velvet chair and stood over her like a general assessing a battlefield. "First things first," she said, producing a fan from somewhere and waving it briskly. "You look like you're about to faint, which would be terribly inconvenient. Deep breaths. That's it. Good." Calanthe obeyed mechanically, her mind still reeling. The Duke's sister. Why would the Duke's sister care about a disgraced nobody with butchered hair? "I don't understand," she managed. "You said you've been looking for me. We've never met." "No, but I've been watching you since you entered." Lady Tamsin settled into the opposite chair with the grace of someone who had never doubted her welcome anywhere. The way you walked down those stairs, everyone gawking, and you didn't cry, didn't flee. You just kept going. That takes steel. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Lady Tamsin leaned forward, her expression growing serious. I know what happened to you. The stepmother, the stepsister. The systematic dismantling of your life since your father died. It's not as secret as Lady Sibylla thinks. Calanthy's breath caught. How do you? Because I make it my business to know things, particularly things that might be useful. She paused, studying Calanthy's face. Your father was Aldrich Faircloth, the shipping merchant. Quite wealthy, quite respected. He married Lady Sibylla 3 years ago, adopted her daughter Venetia, and then conveniently died of a fever 18 months later. His will left everything to his wife, with a modest allowance for you that somehow never materializes. You've been living as an unpaid servant in your own home ever since. Every word was accurate. Every word was a wound. Why are you telling me things I already know? Because I want you to understand that I understand. Lady Tamsin's voice softened. My mother died when I was born. I know what it is to be raised by people who see you as an inconvenience, to have your existence tolerated, rather than celebrated. Calanthy thought of the Duke's cold assessment, his clinical observation of her cut hair. Your brother didn't seem inconvenienced. He seemed entirely indifferent. Hadrian seems indifferent to everything. It's his armor. Lady Tamsin glanced toward the ballroom, where the music had started up again. He's been like that since our father died 2 years ago. Retreated behind defenses so high I can barely see him anymore. Our aunt, Lady Augusta, is convinced that marriage will fix him. She's been parading eligible women past him all season, like he's a prize bull at market. I'm sorry for his loss. And yours. Calanthy meant it, even through her own fog of pain. But I still don't understand why you've cornered me in an alcove. Lady Tamsin smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. Because tonight, you gave him something no one else has managed in 2 years. What could I possibly have given a duke? Surprise. The word hung between them. Calanthy remembered his eyebrow lifting, the fractional shift in his expression when she'd compared them to a traveling show. The way he'd analyzed her hair with such precision, then walked away without false sympathy. That's not a gift, Calanthy said. That's an accident. I wasn't thinking clearly. Exactly. You weren't performing. Everyone performs for Hadrian. The matchmaking mamas with their simpering daughters, the fortune hunters with their calculated charm, even our aunt with her endless lectures about duty. But you just talked to him, insulted him actually, to his face. I called us a traveling show. You did, and he didn't destroy you for it. Lady Tamsin laughed, bright and startling. You don't understand how significant that is. He's eviscerated men in Parliament for less, made debutantes cry with a single look. But you? He walked away without a word, which means you've gotten under his skin. Calanthy shook her head. With respect, Lady Tamsin, I think you're seeing things that aren't there. Your brother looked at me like I was a mildly interesting puzzle, not a person. That's how he looks at everything he's afraid to feel something about. Before Calanthy could respond, a shadow fell across the alcove entrance. The Duke of Vexley stood there, his expression carved from marble. Behind him, the ballroom continued its glittering dance, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the small space. Tamsin? His voice was flat. What are you doing? Having a conversation. You should try it sometime. With the young woman who compared us to circus attractions. She made a valid point. Lady Tamsin rose, smoothing her skirts with exaggerated casualness. Miss Faircloth, may I present my brother properly? Hadrian Vane, Duke of Vexley. "Hadrian, this is Miss Calanthe Faircloth. Be nice to her. She's had a terrible evening." "I can see that." The Duke's gaze swept over Calanthe again, and she forced herself not to shrink under his scrutiny. "Who did it?" "Who did what?" "Your hair." "Who cut it?" Lady Tamsin made a small sound of protest. "Hadrian, really, that's hardly—" "My stepmother." The words fell from Calanthe's lips before she could stop them. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the strange safety of this shadowed alcove, with this odd girl who seemed to know everything, and this impossible man who looked at her like she was a code to crack. "She came to my room 3 hours ago with shears, said she couldn't have me outshining her daughter at Venetia's debut, held me down while the maid cut." Silence. Lady Tamsin's hand flew to her mouth. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something stirred behind his eyes. A darkening, like clouds gathering before a storm. "She held you down," he repeated. "I fought. At first. But she reminded me that I have nowhere else to go. No money, no connections, no prospects. If she turns me out, I'll end up in a workhouse or worse." Calanthe's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "So I stopped fighting, and I let her take the only thing I had left of my mother." The confession left her hollow. She waited for the pity, the dismissal, the polite excuse to escape this uncomfortable conversation. Instead, the Duke turned to his sister. "Fetch Aunt Augusta. Tell her I've found what I'm looking for." Lady Tamsin's eyes went wide. "Hadrian, you can't be serious. You've spoken to her for 5 minutes. Do it now." Something in his tone brooked no argument. Lady Tamsin cast one last, uncertain glance at Calanthe, then disappeared into the ballroom, her blue skirts swirling behind her. Calanthe was alone with the Duke of Vexley. He stepped into the alcove fully now, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the ballroom. Up close, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the exhaustion that even his rigid control couldn't quite hide. He was younger than she'd first thought, 30 perhaps, or 31. But he carried himself like a man who had lived several lifetimes already. "Miss Faircloth." He said her name like he was testing its weight. "I'm going to make you a proposition. I'm not sure I want to hear it." "You will?" He clasped his hands behind his back, every inch the aristocrat. "My aunt has spent the last 2 years attempting to force me into marriage. She believes a wife will cure whatever she thinks is wrong with me. I have refused every candidate she has presented. But she has now issued an ultimatum. Choose a bride by season's end, or she will choose one for me." Calanthe felt the ground shifting beneath her. "What does this have to do with me? I need someone to play a role, a decoy, someone I can present as a potential match to keep my aunt satisfied, while I determine how to dissolve her authority over my affairs." His gray eyes held hers with unnerving intensity. Someone with no connections, no fortune, and no illusions about what this arrangement would be. Her mouth went dry. "You want me to pretend to be courted by you. I want you to live in my household as my sister's companion, to attend events on my arm, to make my aunt believe I am considering you as a bride." He paused. "In exchange, I will remove you from your stepmother's household tonight. You will never return there. And when this arrangement ends, I will ensure you have references, connections, and the means to build whatever life you choose." The offer was impossible, outrageous, the kind of thing that happened in novels, not in real life. And yet, Calanthe thought of Lady Sibylla's satisfied smile, of Venetia's cascading curls, of the cold shears against her neck, and the pieces of her mother's legacy scattered on the floor. "Why me?" she asked. "Of all the women in that ballroom, why would you choose someone like me?" The Duke's expression flickered, something almost human passing through those gray eyes. "Because you didn't bow," he said. "Everyone bows, Everyone scrapes and simpers and performs. But you walked down those stairs with your hair butchered and your dignity in tatters, and you didn't bow to any of them. You even had the audacity to insult me. I didn't mean. You meant every word. And that's precisely why I'm asking." He extended his hand. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Faircloth?" Calanthe stared at his outstretched palm. Behind him, she could see Lady Tamsin returning with an older woman in severe black silk. Lady Augusta, presumably, come to witness whatever madness her nephew was planning. Beyond them, Lady Sibylla had noticed something was happening. She was craning her neck, her expression shifting from smugness to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "Good. Before I agree to anything," Calanthe said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have conditions." The Duke's eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating with me. You need me as much as I need this opportunity. That makes us equals, Your Grace, at least in this." A flicker passed through his expression, the barest hint of a curve at the corner of his mouth, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Name your conditions, Miss Faircloth." The ballroom had grown quieter. Calanthe could feel the weight of attention shifting toward their alcove, curious eyes tracking Lady Augusta's purposeful stride, calculating the implications of the Duke of Vexley holding court in a shadowed corner with the disgraced Faircloth girl. Let them watch. "First condition," Calanthe said, keeping her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I want my father's watch returned to me." The Duke's brow furrowed. "Your father's watch?" "A gold pocket watch with his initials engraved on the case. My mother gave it to him on their wedding day. When he died, Lady Sibylla claimed it as part of the estate. But it was my mother's before it was his, which makes it mine by rights. I want it back." "You could simply ask your stepmother. I've asked. For 18 months I've asked. She tells me it was sold to pay debts. But I know she's lying. I've seen it in her jewelry box. She keeps it there because she knows it hurts me." The Duke studied her for a long moment, and Calanthe had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed against some invisible standard. "I'll have it retrieved," he said finally. "What else? When this arrangement ends, I want a position secured. Not charity, not pity. Actual employment. Governess. Companion. Something respectable that will allow me to support myself. I won't be dependent on anyone's goodwill ever again." "That can be arranged. And your third condition?" This was the one that mattered most. Calanthe took a breath. "I want your word that when you do decide to marry, genuinely for whatever reason, this arrangement ends immediately. I won't be made a fool of. I won't be strung along while you conduct a real courtship behind my back. If I'm to play this role, I play it knowing exactly when the curtain falls." Lady Augusta had reached them now, her sharp eyes moving between Calanthe and her nephew with obvious displeasure. Lady Tamsin hovered behind her, practically vibrating with anticipation. But the Duke ignored them both, his attention fixed entirely on Calanthe. "You ask for transparency," he said slowly. "I ask for honesty. There's been precious little of it in my life. I won't enter into another arrangement built on lies and convenient silences. This entire arrangement is built on lies. You'll be pretending to be my potential bride. That's performance. Performance, I understand. What I won't tolerate is deception between us, behind the scenes. If we're to be partners in this charade, we operate with open cards." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Lady Augusta cleared her throat. "Hadrian, what precisely is happening here? Tamsin said you found what you're looking for, but surely she can't mean—" "Aunt Augusta." The Duke's voice carried the quiet authority that silenced rooms. "May I introduce Miss Calanthe Faircloth? She'll be coming to stay with us as Tamsin's companion. Indefinitely." The older woman's expression could have frozen the Thames. "I see." Each syllable dripped with controlled fury. And does Miss Faircloth understand what she's agreeing to? Does she comprehend the scrutiny she'll face, the rumors that will follow, the absolute certainty that society will tear her apart at the first opportunity? She's already survived society's worst tonight. The Duke's gaze didn't waver from Calanthy's face. I suspect she can manage. This is madness. You've spoken to this girl for a quarter hour at most. You know nothing about her. I know she was held down while someone cut her hair to prevent her from outshining her stepsister. I know she walked into this ballroom regardless, and I know she's the first person in 2 years who's spoken to me like I'm a human being rather than a title to be acquired. Lady Augusta's sharp intake of breath was audible. Lady Tamsin made a small, delighted sound. Calanthy said nothing. What could she say? The Duke of Vexley was defending her. Her, the nobody with the butchered hair and the borrowed dress and 18 months of accumulated humiliations. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. But then Lady Sibylla's voice cut through the moment like a blade. Calanthy, there you are. Her stepmother appeared at the entrance to the alcove, Venetia trailing behind her like a gilded shadow. Lady Sibylla's smile was perfect, concerned, maternal, utterly false. We've been looking everywhere for you, darling. You disappeared so suddenly after. Well, she gestured vaguely at Calanthy's hair with theatrical sympathy. After your little incident. My little incident. Calanthy's voice came out flat. You mean when you held me down and cut off my hair with kitchen shears? The words fell into the crowded alcove like stones into still water. Lady Augusta's eyes widened. Lady Tamsin gasped. Even the Duke's controlled expression flickered with something that might have been satisfaction. Lady Sibylla's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Darling, you're confused. The fever, remember. You begged me to cut it because you couldn't bear the weight. I was only trying to help. There was no fever. You've been unwell for days. Everyone knows it. The doctor said. What doctor? What fever? I was perfectly healthy until you decided Venetia shouldn't have competition tonight. A crowd was gathering now. Calanthy could see them clustering at the edge of the alcove, fans fluttering, eyes bright with scandal's promise. This was what they came to balls for. Not the dancing or the champagne, but the exquisite entertainment of watching someone else's destruction. She didn't care anymore. Miss Faircloth will be leaving with my family this evening, the Duke said, his voice cutting through the mounting tension like a knife through silk. She has accepted a position as my sister's companion. Lady Sibylla's composure finally cracked. I beg your pardon? You heard me. But she can't. She's my stepdaughter. My responsibility. Her father is dead, and by all accounts, you've made her life miserable since the moment he was buried. The Duke stepped forward, and something in his bearing made Lady Sibylla stumble back. Her belongings will be collected tomorrow. You'll send everything that belongs to her, including, he glanced at Calanthy, a gold pocket watch with her father's initials. If anything is missing, I'll know, and I'll respond accordingly. The threat was velvet-wrapped steel. Lady Sibylla recognized it. Her face went pale. Your Grace, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Calanthy has always been prone to dramatics. Her mother was the same way. Do not, Calanthy said quietly, speak of my mother. It was the steel in her voice that silenced everyone. Not the Duke's authority, not Lady Augusta's disapproval, not the crowd's hungry attention. Just Calanthy, standing straight despite everything, refusing to let her mother's memory be weaponized. Lady Sibylla's mouth opened and closed. Venetia looked between them with growing alarm, clearly sensing that the evening was not unfolding as planned. We're leaving, the Duke announced. Tamsin, fetch your wrap. Aunt Augusta, have the carriage brought around. Hadrian, Lady Augusta began. Now. The single word ended all argument. Lady Tamsin practically skipped toward the door. Lady Augusta swept after her with rigid dignity, casting one last inscrutable look at Calanthe. The Duke extended his arm. Calanthe looked at it, then at him. Those slate-colored eyes gave nothing away. He was offering her an escape. From Lady Sibylla, from Venetia, from the ruins of the life she'd been trapped in since her father died. All she had to do was take it. "This is insane," she whispered. "Probably. You barely know me. True. This could ruin both of us. Also true." The corner of his mouth twitched. "But I find I don't care." "Do you?" She thought of her father's watch, locked in Lady Sibylla's jewelry box, of her mother's hair ribbons, given away to servants, of the small bedroom that had once been a storage closet, the meals taken alone in the kitchen, the endless parade of small cruelties designed to remind her that she was unwanted, unloved, and utterly alone. "No," she said. "I don't care either." She took his arm. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, faces blurring into a wash of shock and fascination and barely concealed envy. Calanthe kept her chin high, her spine straight, and her hand steady on the Duke's sleeve. Behind her, she heard Lady Sibylla's voice, high and desperate. "You can't do this. She's nothing. She's nobody. Her mother was a merchant's daughter. Her bloodline is common as dirt." The Duke stopped, turned. His expression was carved from ice. "Her bloodline," he said softly, "is none of your concern. And if I hear you've spoken ill of her again, in public or private, you will discover exactly how much influence the Duke of Vexley has over society's favor. I suggest you take Venetia home and pray I forget you exist." He turned back and continued walking, Calanthe on his arm, leaving Lady Sibylla standing in the middle of the Montclair ballroom with 200 witnesses to her humiliation. The night air hit Calanthe's face as they stepped through the main doors, cool and crisp with the promise of spring. A grand carriage waited at the curb, the Vexley crest gleaming on its door. "Miss Faircloth." The Duke handed her up into the carriage, his touch impersonal but steady. "Welcome to your new life." She settled onto the velvet seat, watching him climb in after her. Lady Tamsin was already there, practically bouncing with excitement. Lady Augusta sat in the opposite corner, her expression promising a reckoning to come. The carriage lurched into motion. Through the window, Calanthe could see the Montclair house receding, its lights blurring through the tears she refused to let fall. She had done it. She had escaped. But as she caught the Duke's unreadable gaze across the darkened carriage, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd merely traded one kind of captivity for another. And she had no idea what price this new cage would ultimately demand. The Vexley townhouse rose from the London street like a monument to generations of accumulated power. 4 stories of cream-colored stone, windows glowing with warm light, a columned entrance that made Calanthe feel approximately 2 inches tall. The carriage had been silent for the journey. Lady Augusta radiated disapproval from her corner, a cold front that lowered the temperature inside the carriage by several degrees. Lady Tamsin had attempted conversation twice before subsiding into watchful quiet. And the Duke, Hadrian, had simply stared out the window, his profile sharp against the passing street lamps, his thoughts entirely his own. Calanthe used the time to inventory her situation. She was riding in a Duke's carriage, wearing a borrowed dress, sporting hair that looked like it had lost a fight with a hedge. She had agreed to pretend to be courted by one of the most powerful men in England, a man she'd met less than an hour ago, in exchange for escape from a stepmother who had systematically dismantled her life. When she laid it out like that, it sounded like madness, but madness was better than the alternative. The carriage stopped. A footman in silver and blue livery appeared to open the door, his expression betraying nothing at the sight of the bedraggled young woman emerging behind his master. More servants waited at the entrance. A butler with a face like carved granite, a housekeeper in severe black, maids and footmen arranged in precise formation. "Welcome to Vexley House, miss," the butler intoned, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you." Calanthy's voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I apologize for arriving so unexpectedly." "No apology necessary, miss. Mrs. Whitmore has already prepared the rose suite." He gestured to the housekeeper, who stepped forward with a perfunctory curtsy. "If you'll follow her, she'll see you settled." Calanthy glanced at the Duke, uncertain whether she should wait for further instruction, but he was already striding into the house without a backward look. Lady Augusta swept past next, her skirts rustling with agitation. Only Lady Tamsin lingered. "Don't mind them," she whispered, squeezing Calanthy's arm. "Hadrian retreats when he's overwhelmed, and Aunt Augusta needs time to recalibrate her schemes. Come, I'll walk up with you. The rose suite is lovely. It was our mother's favorite guest room." The interior of Vexley House stole Calanthy's breath. Marble floors veined with gold, soaring ceilings painted with mythology, crystal chandeliers scattering light into rainbows, portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching from gilded frames. She had grown up comfortable. Her father's shipping business had provided a pleasant house, good food, serviceable clothing. But this was wealth beyond comprehension. The cost of one vase displayed on a side table could have fed her family for a year. "I know it's excessive," Lady Tamsin said, apparently reading her expression. "Father always said it was like living in a museum. He preferred the country estate. Fewer echoes, more life. But Hadrian keeps the London house maintained for Parliament and social obligations." She paused at the base of a sweeping staircase. "It's been rather empty since Father died. No entertaining, no guests. You're the first person Hadrian has voluntarily brought home in 2 years." Calanthy didn't know how to respond to that. The weight of it, the significance Lady Tamsin seemed to attach to her presence, felt too heavy to carry alongside everything else. The rose suite was on the 3rd floor, down a corridor, lined with more paintings and the occasional marble bust. Mrs. Whitmore opened the door with a key from her ring and stepped aside. "The fire's been lit, miss. I've sent Nellie to unpack your—" She stopped, clearly realizing there was nothing to unpack. "That is, we'll arrange for appropriate clothing first thing tomorrow. For tonight, I can provide a nightdress and wrapper from Lady Tamsin's wardrobe." "That would be very kind. Thank you." The housekeeper's expression softened fractionally. "Is there anything else you require, miss? Tea? A light supper?" "Tea would be wonderful." Mrs. Whitmore nodded and departed. Lady Tamsin lingered in the doorway. "Will you be all right? I know this is all rather overwhelming." "I'll manage." Calanthy looked around the room. The 4-poster bed hung with rose silk, the writing desk by the window, the wardrobe that could fit 20 of her old dresses, the attached sitting room with its own fireplace. It was larger than the entire upper floor of her father's house. "Lady Tamsin, just Tamsin, please. We're going to be friends, and friends don't stand on ceremony." "Tamsin, then." Calanthy met her eyes directly. "Why is your brother doing this? Really? And don't tell me it's because I didn't bow. That's not enough reason to upend his entire household for a stranger." Tamsin's bright expression flickered, shadows passing beneath the surface. "Hadrian hasn't been himself since Father died. He functions, brilliantly, actually. Manages the estates, attends Parliament, and fulfills every duty expected of him. But he's not present. It's like watching someone perform a role in a play, hitting every mark without feeling a single line." She leaned against the doorframe. "Tonight was the first time I've seen him react to anything in 2 years. Really react, not just perform a response. When he saw what they'd done to your hair, when you insulted him, something woke up behind his eyes. Something that's Been sleeping for so long I'd forgotten what it looked like. So I'm, what? A curiosity to rouse him from boredom? You're a disruption. Tamsin smiled, but it was bittersweet. And right now, disruption might be the only thing that saves him. She departed before Calanthe could respond, leaving her alone in the rose-scented silence. A maid arrived shortly with tea, biscuits, and a nightdress of fine cotton that probably cost more than anything Calanthe had ever owned. She helped Calanthe undress, clucking sympathetically at the state of her hair. If you don't mind my saying, miss, my sister works at a salon in Bond Street. Very fashionable. She could shape it up proper, make it look intentional-like. That's very kind. Perhaps tomorrow. Alone again, Calanthe sat at the vanity and confronted her reflection. The face that stared back was familiar and strange. Same gray-green eyes, same scattering of freckles across the nose, same stubborn chin. But the frame was all wrong. Her hair, her mother's hair, thick and dark, inherited along with her cheekbones and her temperament, ended in ragged tufts that exposed the vulnerable curve of her neck. Lady Sibylla's final cruelty, written on her body for everyone to see. She wouldn't cry. She'd sworn she wouldn't cry, but alone in this beautiful room, surrounded by more luxury than she'd ever imagined, the tears came anyway. Silent, streaming, unstoppable. A soft knock interrupted her grief. Calanthe scrubbed her face hastily. Come in. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Whitmore with a small package wrapped in brown paper. This just arrived for you, miss. A messenger brought it to the service entrance. Said it was urgent. Calanthe took the package with trembling hands. It was light, small, oddly shaped. She unwrapped it carefully. Her father's watch gleamed in the firelight. The gold was worn smooth with years of handling. The initials AF were still visible on the case, though the engraving had faded. She opened it with shaking fingers, and there was her mother's portrait, miniature and perfect, smiling up at her from beneath the watch face. A note was tucked beneath the wrapping. You asked for honesty between us. I am capable of very little, but this I can provide. Your stepmother surrendered the watch without argument once my solicitor explained the alternative. Josh. The Duke of Vexley had retrieved her father's watch in less than an hour. He'd listened to her conditions, and he'd acted on them immediately, without fanfare or expectation of gratitude. Calanthe pressed the watch to her chest, and finally let herself sob. When morning came, it brought pale sunshine through rose silk curtains, and the quiet efficiency of servants she didn't hear, but whose work was evident everywhere. Fresh flowers in the vase, a dress laid out for her, water already steaming in the basin. Alice helped her dress in a morning gown of soft sage green that fit surprisingly well. Lady Tamsin had it sent up from the modiste this morning, Alice explained at Calanthe's questioning look. She said you'd need something proper to wear while we wait for your wardrobe to arrive. My wardrobe? Oh yes, miss. Lady Tamsin has already sent word to Madame Fontaine. You're to have a fitting this afternoon. Calanthe's head spun. Less than 12 hours, and already her life had been reorganized without her input. Breakfast was served in a sunny morning room overlooking a private garden. Calanthe entered to find Tamsin already seated, and Hadrian conspicuously absent. He eats in his study, Tamsin explained, seeing her glance. Has done since father died. Takes his breakfast at dawn, then locks himself away with estate business until well past noon. Every day? Every day. Parliament, estate management, investments, correspondence. He runs the duchy like a military campaign, and himself like a soldier who's forgotten what peacetime feels like. Calanthe thought of the note tucked into her pocket, the watch now secured in her borrowed reticule. The man who would retrieve a stranger's heirloom at midnight, then hide away come morning. She was still contemplating this contradiction when Lady Augusta entered. The older woman was formidable in daylight, silver hair arranged with mathematical precision, a gown of charcoal silk that made her look like an elegant crow, eyes that missed nothing. She took her seat at the head of the table with the air of a general assuming command. "Miss Faircloth," her voice could have frozen steam, "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Lady Augusta." "Good. You'll need your rest." She accepted tea from a footman without breaking eye contact. "After breakfast, you and I will have a private conversation. It's past time we established expectations." The words landed like a gauntlet thrown. Tamsin made a noise of protest. "Aunt Augusta, surely that can wait." "It cannot. If Miss Faircloth is to remain under this roof, she needs to understand exactly what she's walked into." Lady Augusta's gaze was granite. "And I need to understand exactly who she is." Calanthe set down her teacup with careful precision. "I welcome the conversation, Lady Augusta. I have questions of my own." Something flickered in the older woman's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the first stirrings of respect. "Do you indeed?" It wasn't a question. "Then we shall be very direct with each other, Miss Faircloth. I do so prefer directness. It saves time." The clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes. Tamsin looked between them like a spectator at a fencing match, uncertain which direction the first blade would strike. Calanthe took a bite of toast and chewed slowly, refusing to let Lady Augusta's scrutiny steal her appetite. She had a feeling she'd need her strength for what came next. Lady Augusta's private sitting room was a study in controlled elegance. Every piece of furniture was perfectly positioned. Every surface gleamed with the kind of polish that spoke of servants who feared their mistress's inspections. Calanthe sat in the chair indicated, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Lady Augusta took the chair opposite, arranging her skirts with deliberate care before fixing Calanthe with those calculating eyes. "Close the door, Marbury," she said to the waiting butler. "We are not to be disturbed." The door clicked shut. They were alone. "So," Lady Augusta began, "you've managed to capture my nephew's attention. A remarkable feat, considering his lack of interest in anything remotely human for the past 2 years. "I didn't set out to capture anyone's attention, Lady Augusta. I was simply trying to survive the evening. And yet here you are, installed in our best guest suite, wearing my niece's clothes, with your belongings being collected from your stepmother's house as we speak." The older woman's tone sharpened. Quite an improvement in circumstances for a girl who was nobody yesterday. Calanthe felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. "I was never nobody, Lady Augusta. I was simply treated as though I were." A semantic distinction. An important one. She held the older woman's gaze. "I am the daughter of Aldrich Faircloth, who built a shipping empire from nothing. I am the granddaughter of a naval captain and a merchant's wife. My blood may not be blue, but it is honest, and I will not apologize for my origins." Lady Augusta was silent for a long moment. "Tamsin was right," she said finally. "You do have spine." "Was that in question?" "Everything about you is in question, Miss Faircloth. You've appeared from nowhere. You've been installed in my nephew's household under the flimsiest of pretenses, and now society will believe you're being courted by one of the most eligible men in England." She leaned forward. "So you will forgive me if I treat you with appropriate suspicion?" "I would expect nothing less." "Good. Then let us dispense with pretense." Lady Augusta's voice dropped, becoming almost soft. "Hadrian told you this arrangement is about deflecting my matchmaking attempts. That's partially true. But it's not the whole truth, and you deserve to know what you've actually walked into." Calanthe's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm listening. My nephew is in trouble." The admission seemed to cost Lady Augusta something. Not financial. The duchy is prosperous, not political. His reputation in Parliament is sterling. The trouble is here. She touched her chest, over her heart. And here, she touched her temple. His father's death. His father's death was the catalyst, but the roots go deeper. Lady Augusta rose, moving to the window, her silhouette stark against the morning light. Did Tamsin tell you how Edmund died? Only that it was 2 years ago. A hunting accident. His horse threw him while jumping a fence. He struck his head on a stone and never woke. Her voice was carefully controlled. Hadrian was there. He watched it happen. He held his father in his arms while Edmund bled into the grass, calling for help that came too late. Calanthy's breath caught. The clinical analysis from last night, the way he'd examined her cut hair with such detachment, suddenly took on new meaning. Distance as defense, control as survival. He was always serious, Lady Augusta continued, but he was also warm, passionate. He laughed easily, loved deeply, felt everything intensely. After Edmund died, all of that vanished. He locked it away somewhere I cannot reach, and no matter how I try, no matter what I do, I cannot find the key. So the matchmaking was desperation. I thought if he married, if he had someone to live for, someone to feel for. Lady Augusta turned back to face her. I was wrong to force it. I see that now. But I am not wrong about the underlying truth. Hadrian is disappearing into himself, and if someone doesn't pull him back, there will be nothing left to save. The weight of the words settled over Calanthy like a shroud. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand the stakes. Lady Augusta crossed the room, standing directly before her. You are not here simply to play a role. You are here because, for the first time in 2 years, my nephew showed interest in something beyond duty. You sparked something. I don't know what, or why, or how, but I will not waste that spark. What do you want from me? I want you to be real with him. The words came out fierce, almost desperate. Everyone else performs, simpering debutantes, calculating mothers, sycophantic society. You insulted him to his face. You demanded conditions as though you were his equal. You didn't bow. The same words Hadrian had used. Calanthy wondered if that observation was a family heirloom. I want you to keep doing that, Lady Augusta continued. Challenge him. Argue with him. Refuse to let him retreat behind his barriers. I don't care if you never actually marry him. God knows the scandal would be entertaining. But I need you to make him feel something. Anything. Even if it's anger. And if I fail, Lady Augusta's expression flickered with something that might have been fear. Then I will have watched my nephew die by inches, having done nothing useful to prevent it. Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. You love him, Calanthy said quietly. He is my brother's only son. I held him when he was an hour old. I watched him grow from a curious child into a brilliant man, and I have spent 2 years watching that man hollow himself out until all that remains is the performance of a person. Lady Augusta's voice cracked, then steadied. So yes, Miss Faircloth, I love him. More than I know how to say. Calanthy thought of her own mother, gone too soon, of her father, transformed by grief into a shadow of himself before following his wife into the grave. Of Lady Sibylla, incapable of love, dealing only in control and cruelty. I can't promise anything, she said finally. I can't force him to feel things he's chosen to bury. But I can promise honesty. I can promise not to pretend with him. That's all I ask. No. Calanthy met her eyes directly. You're asking for more than that, and we both know it. You're asking me to care. About him. About this family. About an outcome that has nothing to do with references or employment, or my father's watch. Lady Augusta was silent, but the truth is, Calanthe continued, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. I already do. I don't know why. We've barely spoken. He's cold and distant, and probably incapable of seeing me as anything other than a puzzle to solve. But when he looked at my hair last night and understood exactly what had been done to me, without pity, without judgment, just understanding, something changed. I can't explain it. I don't even know if I want to explain it. Then don't. Lady Augusta's hand reached out, hovering over Calanthe's for a moment before making contact. The touch was brief, barely there, but it conveyed volumes. Just stay. See what happens. And for God's sake, don't let him chase you off when he inevitably tries. He'll try? He always tries. Pushing people away is his primary skill these days. Lady Augusta withdrew her hand, her expression hardening back into its familiar severity. But I suspect you're stubborn enough to push back. I've had 18 months of practice with people trying to make me disappear. Your nephew will find me considerably difficult to dismiss. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Lady Augusta's face. Good. Now, we have practical matters to discuss. You'll need a wardrobe, social instruction, and introduction to key members of society. The Marchioness of Heartwood hosts a music hall next week. Everyone will expect you to attend on Hadrian's arm. We have 7 days to make you presentable. I thought I already was presentable. You have the raw material. We need to polish it until it gleams. Lady Augusta moved toward the door. I've arranged for a hairdresser this afternoon. That maid was right. The cut can be salvaged if properly shaped. We'll make it look intentional. Daring, even. Daring? You'd be surprised how society interprets confidence. Arrive looking ashamed of your hair, and they'll tear you apart. Arrive looking like you chose it, like it's the newest fashion, and they'll be copying you within a fortnight. Calanthe rose, smoothing the borrowed sage dress. Lady Augusta, thank you. For being direct with me. For explaining about the Duke. Don't thank me yet. The older woman opened the door. I've just enlisted you in a campaign that may prove unwinnable, but I've never been one to surrender without a fight. She swept out, leaving Calanthe alone with her racing thoughts and the dawning realization that this arrangement had become far more complicated than she'd imagined. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. The hairdresser came and worked miracles, shaping Calanthe's ragged hair into a sleek, modern style that emphasized her cheekbones and made her eyes look larger. Madame Fontaine arrived with fabric samples and fashion plates, taking measurements with clinical efficiency, while Tamsin exclaimed over colors and silhouettes. Gowns began arriving. Morning dresses, afternoon dresses, evening gowns in silks and satins that made Calanthe's borrowed wardrobe seem like theatrical costumes by comparison. Through it all, Hadrian remained absent. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, a shadow disappearing around a corner, a door closing as she approached, the echo of footsteps retreating down a hallway. He took meals in his study, spent his days locked away with correspondence and estate matters, and seemed determined to pretend she didn't exist. He's always like this, Tamsin assured her. Give him time. But Calanthe wasn't interested in giving him time. Lady Augusta's words haunted her. He always tries. Pushing people away is his primary skill these days. On the 4th day, she decided to stop waiting. The library was magnificent. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a gallery accessible by spiral staircases, leather chairs positioned before a massive fireplace. She'd discovered it on her 2nd day, and had been returning each evening, working her way through shelves of poetry and philosophy while the household slept. Tonight, she wasn't alone. Hadrian sat in one of the leather chairs, a glass of brandy in hand, staring into the flames. He was still in evening clothes. Apparently he'd returned from some parliamentary function, but his cravat was loosened, his hair disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He didn't acknowledge her entrance. Your Grace. Calanthe moved toward the bookshelves, refusing to be intimidated. I didn't realize you'd returned. Obviously. I can leave if you'd prefer solitude. What I'd prefer seems rather irrelevant to everyone in this household. She pulled a volume from the shelf. Poetry, something familiar, and settled into the chair opposite his. Your aunt told me you'd try to chase me away. I'm impressed by how quickly her prediction proved accurate. His eyes finally met hers, gray and glacial. My aunt talks too much. She loves you. That tends to loosen tongues. Love. He said the word like it tasted bitter. Everyone claims to love me. My aunt, my sister, and the endless parade of eligible women my aunt produces like rabbits from a hat. They love my title, my fortune, my political influence. They love the idea of me. None of them have the faintest idea who I actually am. Do you? The question hung between them. Hadrian's expression changed, surprise flickering beneath the ice. That's rather impertinent. You said you chose me because I was impertinent. It seems a waste to abandon the quality now. Calanthe opened her book, though she had no intention of reading. Who are you, Hadrian Vane, when you're not performing your title? I don't know what you mean. I think you do. She kept her voice light, conversational. Your sister says you were different before your father died. Warm, passionate, that you laughed easily and loved deeply. Where did that man go? The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. He died, Hadrian said finally, along with everyone else I've ever loved. Everyone? My mother when I was 12. My grandfather when I was 17. My father 2 years ago. Every person I've allowed myself to love has been taken from me. His voice was flat, reciting facts. At some point, one learns to stop allowing. Calanthe thought of her own losses, her mother to fever, her father to grief, and her entire life to her stepmother's machinations. She understood the impulse to wall off her heart, to refuse vulnerability, to mistake numbness for safety. She also understood that it was killing him. My mother died when I was 13, she said quietly. She caught a fever that winter and simply never recovered. I watched her fade for 3 weeks, held her hand at the end when she didn't have the strength to hold mine. And when she was gone, I thought I would never feel anything again. Hadrian's glass stopped halfway to his lips. But I was wrong, Calanthe continued. Grief isn't the absence of feeling. It's feeling too much. The numbness that follows isn't protection. It's exhaustion. It's our hearts trying to survive something unsurvivable. She paused. The difference is, exhaustion eventually ends, if we let it. And if we don't, then we die too, just more slowly, and more alone. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. Hadrian set down his glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes searching her face. You speak as though you know. I spent 18 months in a house that wanted me erased. Every day, my stepmother found new ways to diminish me. The small room, the hand-me-down clothes, the meals taken alone, the labor that servants used to perform. She was trying to make me nobody. And for a while, I let her succeed. I became so small, so quiet, and so invisible, I nearly forgot I existed at all. What changed? She cut my hair. Calanthe touched the newly shaped strands, still unfamiliar. She held me down and cut off the one thing I had left of my mother, and something inside me broke. But not the way she intended. The numbness shattered instead. I stood up. I walked into that ballroom. I refused to bow. And insulted a duke in the process. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. My mother would have been simultaneously horrified and delighted. Hadrian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, raw, stripped of its careful control. My father was teaching me to jump that fence. It was too high. I knew it was too high. But he laughed and said veins never back down from a challenge. So I followed him. And when his horse refused, when he went over the animal's head, when I heard the sound of... He stopped. Swallowed. I held him for 47 minutes before help arrived. I counted. Every second, I counted. Because counting was the only thing that kept me from screaming. Calanthy's heart clenched. She wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but instinct told her any touch would shatter whatever fragile honesty had emerged between them. You blame yourself. I should have stopped him. Should have insisted we take the lower route. Should have controlled something that was never yours to control. Her voice was gentle but firm. Your father made a choice, a reckless one, perhaps, but his own. You didn't push him toward that fence. You didn't make his horse refuse. You didn't choose the angle at which he fell or the stone his head struck. You were a witness, Hadrian, not a cause. It doesn't feel that way. Grief never does. Grief lies. It tells us we could have prevented the inevitable, that our love should have been powerful enough to rewrite fate. It's the cruelest trick our hearts play on us, making us feel responsible for things that were never within our power. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw behind the walls. Saw the devastation he'd been carrying, the guilt he'd been drowning in, the loneliness that his control and distance couldn't quite conceal. How do you bear it? He asked. The grief, the loss. How do you carry it without being crushed? Calanthy considered the question carefully. I don't carry it alone. She held up her father's watch, which she'd taken to keeping in her pocket. I carry her with me. My mother's portrait, my father's timepiece, the memories I refuse to let Lady Sibylla poison. I carry them, and when the weight becomes too heavy, I remember that they would want me to live. Not just survive. Live. She rose, moved toward him, and, after only a moment's hesitation, placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, his fingers twitched, but didn't pull away. You're not betraying your father by feeling things again, she said softly. You're honoring him. He raised a man who feels deeply enough to be destroyed by loss. That's not weakness. That's the measure of how much you loved. Hadrian's throat worked. For a terrible, beautiful moment, she thought he might weep. Instead, he turned his hand over and clasped hers. Stay, he said. Tomorrow night, there's a dinner. Aunt Augusta has arranged it. I was going to make excuses, but he stopped. Stay. Be there. I don't think I can face it alone. You won't be alone. No. His eyes held hers, gray and struggling. I'm beginning to realize that. They sat like that, hands clasped, firelight dancing, until the clock chimed midnight and broke the spell. Hadrian released her with obvious reluctance, standing and retreating toward the door. Miss Faircloth, Calanthy. Her name in his voice sounded like a discovery. Thank you. For not treating me like glass. You're not glass. You're stone. And stone only crumbles when it refuses to bend. That almost smile again. There and gone. Good night, Calanthy. Good night, Hadrian. He left. She remained in the library for another hour, staring at the fire, feeling the ghost of his hand against hers, and wondering when, exactly, this arrangement had become something terrifyingly real. The Marchioness of Heartwood's musicale was the first true test. Calanthy stood before the mirror in her room, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. The gown was a deep emerald silk that made her eyes luminous and her skin glow like candlelight. Her shortened hair had been styled into elegant waves that framed her face, adorned with a single pearl comb that Tamsin had insisted she wear. The overall effect was striking, not despite her shorn locks, but somehow because of them. Daring, Lady Augusta had said. Intentional. Calanthe repeated the words like a prayer as Alice fastened the last button. "You look beautiful, miss," Alice said softly, like someone who chose every part of themselves. The sentiment struck deeper than intended. For the first time in 18 months, Calanthe felt like she had chosen something. This dress, this household, this impossible arrangement with a duke who held her hand in firelight and asked her to stay. Whatever tonight brought, she would face it as herself. Hadrian waited at the bottom of the staircase. He was arresting in evening clothes, his dark hair swept back from that carved face, his gray eyes tracking her descent with an intensity that made her breath catch. He'd been avoiding her since their conversation in the library, not coldly, but carefully, as though proximity might burn. "Miss Faircloth," his voice was formal, but something flickered beneath it. "You look adequate," she offered, remembering his first assessment. "I was going to say remarkable, but adequate will suffice if you prefer." Tamsin appeared behind them, radiant and pale blue. "Oh, stop being awkward, both of you. Calanthe, you're stunning. Hadrian, tell her she's stunning without choking on the words. There. Now we can leave." Lady Augusta swept down after them, severe in silver silk, and within moments they were in the carriage, rattling toward whatever judgment awaited. The heart. "So this is the mysterious Miss Faircloth. I've heard such fascinating things." "I'm certain you have, my lady. Society does love to talk. Indeed it does, though I find the reality often disappoints compared to the gossip." The Marchioness's eyes moved over Calanthe's hair, her gown, her posture. "In your case, however, I suspect the opposite is true. Welcome to my home, Miss Faircloth. Do try to scandalize someone before the evening ends. These affairs are dreadfully dull otherwise." Tamsin stifled a laugh. Hadrian's hand pressed briefly against Calanthe's back. Approval or warning? The musical itself was elegant torture. A soprano performed arias, while the audience pretended to listen and actually watched each other. Calanthe felt the weight of observation like a physical pressure. Matrons whispering behind fans, young women casting envious glances, gentlemen assessing her with varying degrees of propriety. And through it all, Lady Sibylla's presence like a poison in the room. She was here. Of course she was here. Seated 3 rows back with Venetia, both of them wearing expressions of wounded innocence that Calanthe recognized all too well. They'd positioned themselves perfectly, close enough to observe, far enough to claim coincidence. During the interval, the confrontation became inevitable. "Miss Faircloth," Lady Sibylla's voice carried across the refreshment table with theatrical concern. "How wonderful to see you looking so recovered. We've been terribly worried since you left so suddenly." The crowd around them stilled, scenting blood. "I'm sure you have, Lady Sibylla." Calanthe kept her voice pleasant. "Though I believe suddenly is generous. I left with the Duke of Vexley, in his carriage, after he publicly dressed you down in front of 200 witnesses." Gasps rippled through the assembled guests. Lady Sibylla's smile froze. "Darling, you're confused again. The fever." "There was no fever." Calanthe stepped closer, dropping her voice to carry only to those immediately around them, which of course meant it would spread through the entire room within minutes. "There was only you, holding me down while your maid cut my hair because you couldn't bear for me to outshine Venetia." Again, Venetia flushed scarlet. "That's not—" "Mother didn't. She did, and now everyone knows it." Calanthe turned to the watching crowd with a smile that felt like armor. "I apologize for the dramatics. Family disagreements are so tiresome in public. But since my stepmother seems determined to continue her campaign of lies, I thought clarity might be useful." Lady Sibylla's composure finally cracked. Her face twisted with genuine hatred. The face Calanthe had lived with for 18 months, finally visible to the world. You ungrateful little wretch. After everything I did for you. You mean stealing my inheritance? Reducing me to a servant in my own home? Destroying the one thing I had left of my mother? Calanthe's voice shook, but she didn't retreat. Yes, I'm quite ungrateful for all of that. Ladies, Hadrian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He appeared at Calanthe's side, his expression carved from ice. This conversation is concluded. Your Grace, surely you must understand, Lady Sibylla began. I understand perfectly, Lady Sibylla, and I meant what I said at the Montclair ball. If you continue to speak ill of Miss Faircloth, you will discover exactly how unpleasant my attention can be. He offered Calanthe his arm. Shall we? She took it, her legs trembling beneath her gown, and let him guide her away from the wreckage of the confrontation. Behind them, whispers exploded like fireworks. Shock, delight, the peculiar pleasure society took in witnessing someone else's destruction. Hadrian led her through a set of French doors onto a moonlit terrace. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, sweet with the scent of jasmine from the garden below. Breathe, he said quietly. You're shaking. I just destroyed my stepmother in front of everyone. I think shaking is justified. You defended yourself. There's a difference. His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. That took courage. It took rage. 18 months of it. She laughed, but it came out unsteady. I've fantasized about telling the truth in public 1,000 times. I never thought I'd actually do it. How does it feel? Calanthe considered. Terrifying, exhilarating, like jumping off a cliff and discovering I have wings. An apt metaphor. Hadrian's voice was strange, thick with something she couldn't identify. I watched you in there, facing her down, not backing away, not apologizing, just truth, raw and devastating. Was it too much? It was magnificent. The word hung between them, glittering with implication. Hadrian, don't! He released her hand, stepping back, the barriers rebuilding themselves in real time. I shouldn't have. This is an arrangement, a performance. I have no right to what? Feel something? Calanthe moved toward him, refusing the distance he was trying to create. Because that's what just happened, isn't it? You felt something. And now you're terrified. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I watched you watch me. I felt your hand on mine. And just now, when you called me magnificent, that wasn't performance, Hadrian. That was real. His jaw clenched. The moonlight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the war playing out beneath his careful control. Everything I feel is a danger, he said finally, to myself, to you, to anyone foolish enough to get close. That's fear talking, not truth. It is truth. Everyone I love dies, you've said. But here's what you haven't considered. She stepped closer still, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his throat. What if you're wrong? What if feeling things doesn't doom people? What if closing yourself off is the thing that's killing you? Calanthe, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking you to stop running, just for one moment, and admit that this, she gestured between them, is more than an arrangement, more than a performance, more than either of us expected. Silence. The jasmine-scented air swirled around them. Inside, the music had resumed, a distant waltz that seemed to belong to another world. Yes, Hadrian said, the word torn from somewhere deep. It's more. God help me, it's more. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like she'd imagined, and everything she'd needed. His hands cupped her face with incredible gentleness, his mouth finding hers with the precision of someone who had been thinking about this moment for longer than he wanted to admit. She tasted champagne and desperation, and something that might have been surrender. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, his breathing ragged. "This changes everything," he whispered. "I know. I don't know how to do this, how to be open, present, all the things you said. Neither do I." She smiled against his lips. "Maybe we learn together." For one perfect moment, the world held its breath. Then voices drifted from the terrace doors, guests emerging for air, about to stumble upon the Duke of Vexley, embracing his sister's companion in the moonlight. They separated quickly, but not quickly enough. Lady Sibylla stood in the doorway, Venetia behind her, both wearing expressions of vicious triumph. "Well, well," Lady Sibylla said, her voice carrying across the terrace. "What a touching scene. I wonder what society will make of the Duke of Vexley taking such liberties with a girl of no family or consequence." Behind her, the crowd gathered, drawn by the promise of scandal. And Calanthe realized that her moment of triumph had just transformed into potential ruin. The terrace fell silent. Calanthe could feel the crowd's attention like a physical weight, hungry, judgmental, already composing the gossip they would spread by morning. The Duke of Vexley, caught in a compromising embrace with the nobody from nowhere. The girl who had accused her stepmother of cruelty, now revealed as the opportunistic seductress everyone had suspected. Lady Sibylla's smile was a knife, sharp and satisfied. "Your Grace, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." Her voice dripped with false concern. "Perhaps Miss Faircloth was feeling faint. The evening has been so eventful." Hadrian stepped forward, his expression unreadable. But before he could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "An explanation? For what?" Lady Augusta appeared in the doorway, her presence parting the crowd like a ship's prow through water. "I sent Miss Faircloth to the terrace to recover from her confrontation with you, Lady Sibylla. My nephew accompanied her for protection. Are you suggesting impropriety in their behavior, or merely hoping to manufacture it?" The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Lady Sibylla's smile faltered. "I saw." "You saw what you wanted to see." Lady Augusta moved to Calanthe's side, her hand closing on the younger woman's arm with possessive firmness. "Which is understandable, given how thoroughly Miss Faircloth exposed your cruelty this evening. Desperate people often lash out." Whispers rippled through the crowd, but the tenor had shifted. Lady Augusta's intervention had reframed the narrative, not a scandal of seduction, but a vindictive stepmother striking back at the stepdaughter who had escaped her. "This is ridiculous," Lady Sibylla hissed. "Everyone knows what kind of girl she is." "What kind is that, precisely?" The Marchioness of Heartwood emerged from the crowd, her expression dangerous. "A young woman who was abused by her stepmother and rescued by one of the most respectable families in England? Please, Lady Sibylla, do enlighten us." The trap had closed. Lady Sibylla looked around the terrace, searching for allies, and found none. Even the gossips who had been eager for scandal moments ago were now regarding her with distaste. She had overplayed her hand, made her cruelty too visible, and society, which tolerated any number of sins committed discreetly, had no patience for vulgarity. "Come, Venetia." Lady Sibylla's voice was brittle. "We're leaving." "Mother, now." They swept away, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence. The crowd dispersed slowly, drifting back inside with the air of children denied a promised treat. When they were finally alone, Lady Augusta released Calanthe's arm. That was close. Too close. Her eyes moved between Calanthe and Hadrian, assessing. "I don't know what actually happened, and I don't want to know. But if you're going to engage in behaviors that could ruin us all, have the decency to do it somewhere without windows." She departed without waiting for a response. Hadrian exhaled slowly. She's right. That was reckless. We were seen. We were nearly destroyed. He ran a hand through his hair, wrecking its careful arrangement. If Lady Augusta hadn't intervened. But she did. Calanthe moved toward him, but he stepped back, the walls rising again. Hadrian, don't. Don't what? Acknowledge reality? His voice was harsh. I kissed you on a public terrace. Society was 10 seconds from declaring you ruined. Everything you've worked for, the references, the connections, the future you're trying to build, I nearly destroyed it all because I couldn't control myself for one moment. You weren't alone in that moment. I should have been stronger, should have maintained distance, should have continued suffocating behind your walls. The words came out sharper than intended. That's not strength, Hadrian. That's fear wearing a mask. His expression flickered. Pain, anger, something rawer beneath both. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Because right now, you're pushing me away exactly like your aunt predicted, and I'm trying to decide whether to let you. Silence fell between them, heavy with everything unsaid. My father, Hadrian began, then stopped. Started again. My father kissed my mother goodbye on the morning he died. I watched them. She said, "Be careful," and he laughed and said, "Always." 3 hours later, he was dead in my arms. Calanthe's breath caught. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times. What if she'd made him stay? What if her worry had been enough to change his mind? But it wasn't. Loving her, being loved by her, it didn't protect him. It just meant she had to spend the rest of her life missing him. He met her eyes, and his were devastated. She died 6 months later. The doctors called it fever. But I know the truth. She died because living without him was unbearable. Hadrian, I watched love destroy them both. My father's death killed my mother, and their deaths killed something in me. His voice cracked. I can't do that to someone else. I can't love someone and then be the reason they... Stop. Calanthe crossed the distance between them, taking his face in her hands the way he'd taken hers moments ago. You are not your father. I am not your mother. And love doesn't work the way you think it does. You don't know that. I know that my mother loved my father enough to marry him despite her family's objections. She died of fever when I was 13. Not of grief, not of love, just a terrible illness that took her too soon. And you know what she told me before she went? Tears were streaming down Calanthe's face now, but she didn't care. She said loving my father was the greatest gift of her life, not a curse, not a danger, a gift. Hadrian's hands came up to cover hers, trembling. I'm terrified, he admitted. Not of dying, of feeling, of letting you in, and then losing you the way I've lost everyone else. You might lose me. I might lose you. That's true of everyone who ever loves anyone. She pressed closer. But the alternative, the walls, the distance, the slow death of feeling nothing, that's not safety, Hadrian. That's just loneliness dressed up as protection. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. The moonlight caught the tears he was too proud to shed, the tremor in his jaw, the war being waged behind those gray eyes. Then, slowly, carefully, like a man stepping off a cliff on faith alone, he pulled her into his arms. I don't know how to do this, he murmured against her hair. I don't know how to feel without drowning. We'll figure it out. Together. He held her tighter, as though she might vanish if he let go. Tomorrow, he said, I need to speak with you properly. Not on a terrace, not with an audience. There are things I should have told you from the beginning. Things that will change what you think of me. What kind of things? The truth about why I really needed you, about the arrangement, He stopped. Tomorrow. I promise. Calanthe wanted to push, to demand answers now, but she could feel the fragility in him, the courage it had taken to crack the walls even this much. Some confessions needed daylight to survive. Tomorrow, she agreed. They stood together in the moonlight, holding each other like survivors of a shipwreck, until the sounds from inside reminded them that the world was still watching. When they finally returned to the musical, hands properly distant, expressions carefully composed, Calanthe carried the memory of his arms around her like a secret. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight had changed everything. Morning came, and with it, catastrophe. Calanthe woke to shouting. Lady Augusta's voice raised in fury, Tamsin's in distress, and beneath both, a silence where Hadrian's voice should have been. She threw on a wrapper and rushed to the hallway, nearly colliding with Alice. "Miss, you shouldn't. There's been news." "What news?" Alice's face crumpled. "The Duke, miss. He's gone." The words made no sense. Gone? Gone where? The country estate, Ashworth Manor. He left before dawn. Alice pressed a folded paper into Calanthe's hands. "He left this for you." The note was brief, his handwriting sharp and jagged. "Forgive me. I cannot explain, but I must go. The truth I promised you would only bring you pain. You deserve better than what I am. Forget this arrangement. Forget me. Build the life you deserve without the shadow of a broken man darkening it." Calanthe read it 3 times before the meaning penetrated. He had run. After everything. The library, the kiss, the promises. He had run. She found Lady Augusta in the morning room, her composure shattered, pacing like a caged lion, while Tamsin wept in a chair. "What happened?" Calanthe demanded. "What made him leave?" "Lady Sibylla." Lady Augusta's voice was venomous. She sent an urgent message at dawn, claiming she had information about his father's death. She bribed a footman to deliver it directly to Hadrian's chambers before any of us were awake. By the time I learned of it, he was already gone. What could she possibly have said? I don't know. But whatever it was, it worked. Lady Augusta stopped pacing, her face a mask of grief and rage. He's done this before. Retreated to the country when things became too difficult. But this time, after last night, I thought perhaps. She couldn't finish. Tamsin looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "You have to go after him." "Me?" Calanthe's voice cracked. "He left a note telling me to forget him." "And you believe that's what he wants? Truly?" Tamsin rose, crossing to her. "My brother has spent 2 years running from everything that makes him feel. You're the first person who's made him want to stop running. Whatever Lady Sibylla told him, whatever lies she spun, they were designed to make him flee. Don't let her win." "I don't even know what she said. Does it matter?" Lady Augusta's voice was sharp. Whatever it was manipulation. Calculated cruelty designed to destroy what was building between you. Are you going to let that stand? Calanthe thought of the note in her hand, the jagged handwriting, the desperation beneath every word. Forget me. But she couldn't. Not after the library. Not after the moonlight. Not after he'd held her like she was the only solid thing in a drowning world. "Where is Ashworth Manor?" Lady Augusta's expression shifted, hope flickering beneath the fury. 3 hours by carriage. I'll have it prepared immediately. Calanthe. Tamsin grabbed her hands. "Bring him back, please." Calanthe looked at the note one more time, then crushed it in her fist. "I'm not bringing him back for your sake, or Lady Augusta's, or anyone else's. I'm bringing him back because he made me a promise. The truth, he said. Tomorrow. And I'm not letting him escape that promise just because my stepmother has one more trick to play." She turned and strode toward the stairs, already calculating what she'd need for the journey. Behind her, she heard Lady Augusta say quietly to Tamsin, "Well, it seems we chose better than we knew." The carriage ride to Ashworth Manor was torture. 3 hours of countryside rolling past, indifferent to her turmoil. 3 hours replaying every moment with Hadrian, searching for anything that might explain why he had run. By the time the manor appeared on the horizon, Calanthe's fury had crystallized into something cold and sharp. Ashworth Manor was nothing like the London townhouse. Where Vexley House was formal and imposing, the manor sprawled across its grounds with rambling warmth. Stone walls covered in ivy, gardens gone slightly wild, a lake glittering in the afternoon sun. It looked like a place where laughter might have once echoed, before grief silenced it. The butler who answered the door was clearly unprepared for visitors. "Miss, I beg your pardon, but the Duke has given strict instructions." "The Duke can give me those instructions himself." Calanthe pushed past him into the entrance hall. "Where is he?" "Miss, I really must insist. The lake." A new voice, female, came from the stairs. An older woman descended, gray-haired and kind-faced, wearing the apron of a housekeeper. "He always goes to the lake when he wants to disappear. Has since he was a boy." "Mrs. Hartley," the butler protested. "Oh, hush, Crawford. The poor girl's traveled 3 hours to collect our stubborn master. The least we can do is point her in the right direction." The housekeeper's eyes met Calanthe's with something like approval. Through the gardens, past the rose arbor, down the hill. "You can't miss it." "Thank you." Calanthe ran. The gardens were beautiful, overgrown, and full of thorns that caught at her dress as she pushed through. The rose arbor was tangled and wild, petals scattered across the path like offerings. And beyond it, just as promised, the lake spread silver and still, with a single figure standing at its edge. Hadrian heard her approach. Of course he did. But he didn't turn. "I told you to forget me. And I told you I don't take orders from cowards." He flinched at the word, but still didn't turn. "You should go back to London. Lady Augusta will help you find a position. The references I promised. Damn your references." Calanthe stopped a few feet behind him, breathing hard. "You made me a promise, Hadrian. The truth. Tomorrow. Remember. The truth is poison. The truth is what I'm owed. After everything. After the library. After the terrace. After you held me like I mattered. You don't get to run away and hide behind noble suffering. You owe me an explanation." Finally, he turned. He looked terrible. The careful control that defined him had cracked, revealing the devastation beneath. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard, his entire being radiating a despair that stole her breath. "Lady Sibylla sent me a message this morning." "I know. She told me something. About my father. About the accident." He laughed, and it was the most broken sound Calanthe had ever heard. "My father didn't fall from his horse." The world tilted. "What do you mean?" "She claims she was there, at the hunt that day, a guest of the local gentry. She says she saw what happened." His voice was hollow. "My father's horse didn't throw him. The girth strap was cut. Someone sabotaged his saddle." Calanthe's blood ran cold. "Someone murdered him. My father was murdered?" Hadrian's composure shattered completely. "And according to Lady Sibylla, she knows who did it. But she'll only tell me if I give her what she wants." "Which is you." His eyes met hers, devastated. "She wants you returned to her household, publicly disgraced, your accusations recanted. In exchange, she'll tell me who killed my father." The manipulation was so monstrous, so perfectly calculated, that Calanthe almost admired its cruelty. "And you believed her? You ran away to protect me from a trade you thought I couldn't refuse?" I ran away because I can't choose. His voice cracked. I can't choose between the truth about my father and you. I can't. So, you chose to give us both up instead. Anger flooded through her, hot and clarifying. That's not protection, Hadrian. That's surrender. What would you have me do? Fight. She closed the distance between them, grabbing his lapels. We find another way to uncover the truth. We expose Lady Sibylla's blackmail. We refuse to let her control us. You don't understand. If she knows who killed him, she's lying. The certainty crystallized as Calanthe spoke. Think about it. Lady Sibylla has spent 18 months trying to destroy me. Now, when I've finally escaped, when I've finally found someone who... She stopped. She's lying because the truth is her only weapon left. She'll say anything, invent anything, to get what she wants. Lady Sibylla never valued leverage she couldn't spend immediately. The logic was sound. She could see him processing it, the desperate hope warring with the grief. But if there's even a chance, then we investigate. Properly. Not by surrendering to a woman who held me down and cut my hair to make me unwantable. Calanthe's grip on his lapels tightened. You asked me to stay, to be real with you, to help you feel something again. Well, I'm staying. I'm being real. And what I feel right now is furious that you tried to throw away everything we're building because my stepmother is a monster. He was crying now. Actually crying, tears streaming down that devastated face, his barriers crumbled beyond any hope of rebuilding. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. Neither do I. But we figure it out together. Isn't that what I said? For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, slowly, his hands came up to cover hers where they gripped his coat. I'm sorry. I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need partnership. She softened her grip, let her hand slide up to cup his face. Can you give me that? Yes. The word was a vow. God, help me. Yes. He kissed her, and it tasted of salt and surrender, and something that might have been hope. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting over the lake, painting everything gold. We should return to London, he said quietly. Face whatever comes together. Together, she agreed. They walked back toward the manor hand in hand, leaving the lake and its shadows behind. The carriage ride back to London was nothing like the journey out. Calanthe and Hadrian sat side by side, their hands intertwined, speaking in low voices about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood at Ashworth Manor, the tree he'd climbed despite his mother's protests, the pony his father had given him for his 8th birthday, the hidden alcove in the library where he'd read adventure stories when he should have been studying Greek. She told him about her mother's garden, filled with roses that bloomed every color, and how she'd learned to read sitting in her father's lap while he reviewed shipping manifests. About Jonathan, her brother, who she'd barely mentioned before, who had their father's dreaming nature and their mother's stubborn heart. They spoke of grief and healing, of the slow work of choosing to live again. Beneath it all ran something new, a foundation being laid, stone by careful stone. When they arrived at Vexley House near midnight, the household was waiting. Tamsin flew down the steps and threw herself at both of them, laughing and crying simultaneously. Lady Augusta stood in the doorway, her expression complex, relief and caution, and something that might have been hope. Well, she said as they approached, I see the prodigal has returned, with company no less. Aunt Augusta, Hadrian began, we'll speak in the morning. For now, rest. Both of you. Her eyes lingered on their joined hands. I assume there are developments I should be aware of. Several. Hadrian's voice was steady for the first time since Calanthe had known him. But they can wait until we've dealt with Lady Sibylla. Dealt with her, how? She made a claim this morning about my father's death, about it being murder. gasps from Tamsin and the assembled servants, but Lady Augusta's expression merely sharpened. I don't believe her. Neither does Calanthe. But we need to be certain. Lady Augusta was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I may have information that's relevant. Edmund, your father, confided certain suspicions to me before he died. I dismissed them as paranoia at the time. Perhaps I was wrong. She stepped aside to let them enter. Tomorrow, after breakfast, we'll discuss everything. The household settled into an uneasy quiet. Calanthe retreated to her room, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind churned with questions about Lady Sibylla's claims, about Lady Augusta's secrets, about what tomorrow might reveal. Near 2 a.m, she gave up and made her way to the library. Hadrian was already there. He sat in his usual chair, staring at the dying fire, but he looked up when she entered. The devastation from earlier had faded, replaced by something more settled. Still wounded, but no longer drowning. Couldn't sleep either? Too many thoughts. She settled into the chair across from him. Your aunt said your father confided suspicions to her. Do you know what she meant? No. His brow furrowed. Father and Aunt Augusta were close, but he never mentioned anything to me about feeling unsafe or threatened. Maybe he was protecting you. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. Calanthe, if Lady Sibylla's claim is true, if my father really was murdered, then we find out who did it and why, and we make them answer for it. She reached across the space between them, taking his hand. But we don't sacrifice ourselves in the process. That's not what your father would have wanted. His fingers tightened around hers. You sound very certain about what my father would have wanted. I'm certain about what loving parents want for their children. Safety, happiness, a future worth living. She thought of her own parents, of the sacrifices they had made, of the love that had shaped her even in their absence. Whatever happened to your father, he wouldn't want you to destroy yourself avenging him. Hadrian was silent for a long time. I've spent 2 years wishing I could have saved him, he said finally, imagining what I could have done differently, blaming myself for not seeing it coming, for not somehow preventing his death. And now? Now I'm starting to realize that blame is just another way of avoiding grief. He met her eyes. You've taught me that. In the span of a few weeks, you've dismantled defenses I spent years building. Is that a complaint? It's a thank you. He raised their joined hands, pressing his lips to her knuckles. For not letting me run, for coming after me, for being stubborn enough to match my fear with something stronger. What's stronger than fear? Hope. The word was barely a whisper. I'd forgotten what it felt like. To hope, to want a future, instead of merely enduring the present. Calanthe's heart clenched. Hadrian, I love you. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward toward infinity. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But I've spent 2 years feeling nothing, and in 3 weeks, you've made me feel everything. His voice shook. So yes, I love you. And I know that's terrifying, and I know the timing is absurd, but I couldn't spend another moment pretending otherwise. Calanthe stared at him, at this impossible man who had started as a cold stranger and become, what? Her ally, her confidant, her reason for believing that life could still hold sweetness. I love you too, she heard herself say, against all logic and reason, despite the fact that you can be the most infuriating person I've ever met. His laugh was startled, genuine, a sound she'd never heard from him before. Infuriating? Absolutely maddening. She was laughing now too, tears pricking her eyes. You run away to the country without explanation. You write melodramatic notes about being a shadow, You make me chase you for 3 hours in a carriage." He kissed her, swallowing the list of complaints, and she let him because none of them mattered anyway. When they finally parted, the fire had died to embers, but neither of them noticed. "Tomorrow," he said, "we face whatever Lady Sibylla has planned. Together." "Together," she agreed. They sat hand in hand until the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, the future felt like a promise instead of a threat. Lady Augusta's revelation came over breakfast. She waited until the servants had departed, until it was just the four of them, Hadrian, Calanthe, Tamsin, and herself, gathered around the morning room table like conspirators preparing for war. "What I'm about to tell you stays within this room," she began. "Edmund, your father, came to me 3 weeks before his death. He was agitated, distressed in a way I'd never seen before. He said he'd discovered something about his business partner." Hadrian went rigid. "Mr. Aldrich Faircloth." Calanthe's breath stopped. "Yes." Lady Augusta's eyes flickered to her with something like apology. "Your father, Miss Faircloth. They were partners in the shipping venture. Edmund invested heavily based on Aldrich's projections, but he'd begun to suspect something was wrong. Irregularities in the accounts, shipments that didn't match manifests, money moving through channels that couldn't be traced. My father was honest." The words came out fierce, defensive. He was honest, Lady Augusta agreed, which is precisely why he died. Silence crashed over the table. "I don't understand," Tamsin said, her voice small. "Edmund believed someone else was using the shipping company for illegal purposes. Smuggling, perhaps, or something worse. He thought Aldrich had discovered the truth and was preparing to expose it." Lady Augusta's hands trembled around her teacup. He wanted to speak to Aldrich directly, to coordinate their evidence before going to the authorities. "But my father died first." Calanthe's voice was hollow. "And then yours. 2 men who knew the truth. Both dead within months of each other." Hadrian's face had gone pale with fury. "And you never thought to mention this before?" "I had no proof. Edmund's suspicions died with him, and Aldrich's death was attributed to fever. There was nothing to investigate, no evidence to pursue. Just an old woman's memories of a conversation that might have meant anything or nothing. It means everything." Hadrian stood abruptly, pacing. "Someone killed my father to protect their secrets. Someone who had access to his saddle, who knew he'd be at that hunt. Someone who stood to lose everything if the truth came out," Calanthe finished. Her mind was racing, pieces clicking together. "Lady Sibylla married my father shortly after he started expressing concerns about the business. She had access to all his papers, all his correspondence. You think she was involved?" Tamsin looked horrified. "I think she was more than involved." A terrible certainty was forming in Calanthe's chest. "I think she was positioned deliberately, married into the family to monitor what my father knew, to report back to whoever was really running the operation. And when both men became liabilities," Lady Augusta's voice was barely a whisper, "they were eliminated." The word hung in the air like a death knell. Hadrian stopped pacing. His face had transformed, the grief burning away to leave something harder. Determination. "We need evidence. Real evidence, not speculation." Lady Sibylla mentioned papers, Calanthe said slowly, remembering. "When she was trying to control my father's estate, she tore the house apart looking for something. She said it was business records, inventory lists, but she was desperate, frantic, because the evidence your father gathered might still exist." Hadrian's eyes met hers. Where would he have hidden it? Calanthe thought of her father, of his careful nature, his love of books, his habit of hiding important things in plain sight. "The library," she said suddenly. "He had a collection of Shakespeare, Mother gave it to him when they married. He used to say the best secrets were hidden in stories. Lady Sibylla never valued books. She'd have kept them for appearance, but never examined them closely. Lady Sibylla still has the house. She wouldn't have thought to check the books. She barely reads. Hadrian was already moving toward the door. We need to get those papers before she realizes what she's missing. Wait. Calanthe caught his arm. You can't simply walk into her house. She'll have you arrested for trespassing. Then we won't walk in. His smile was sharp, dangerous. We'll be invited. The plan was audacious. Lady Augusta, drawing on decades of social expertise, engineered an invitation to Lady Sibylla's afternoon tea. The pretext was a formal apology. The Vexley family seeking to smooth over the embarrassment of the musical confrontation. It was the kind of social fiction that society adored, and Lady Sibylla's vanity couldn't resist. Calanthe would accompany Lady Augusta as a gesture of reconciliation. And while Lady Sibylla gloated over her apparent victory, Hadrian and Tamsin would enter through the servants' entrance, find the library, and search the Shakespeare collection. "This is madness," Tamsin whispered, as their carriages separated. One toward Lady Sibylla's townhouse, the other toward the alley behind it. "What if we're caught? Then we improvise." Hadrian's expression was grim. "But we won't be caught." Inside Lady Sibylla's drawing room, the atmosphere was poisonous with false courtesy. Miss Faircloth. Lady Sibylla's smile was a triumph. "How unexpected. I assumed you'd still be hiding behind the Duke's skirts." Lady Augusta felt a personal apology was warranted. Calanthe kept her voice neutral, her expression contrite. "The scene at the music hall was inappropriate. Whatever our personal disagreements, public confrontation serves no one." Lady Sibylla preened, accepting the capitulation she believed she was witnessing. "How gratifying to hear. I've always said you simply needed proper guidance. Your mother, God rest her soul, was too indulgent." Calanthe's nails bit into her palms, but she smiled. Lady Augusta carried the conversation with practiced ease, discussing the weather, the season, the latest gossip. Every minute that passed was another minute for Hadrian and Tamsin to complete their search. 20 minutes. 30. Calanthe's nerves were screaming. Then Venetia entered, her face pale with alarm. "Mother, there's someone in the library." Everything happened at once. Lady Sibylla rose, her composure shattering. Calanthe moved to block the door. Lady Augusta pressed a hand to her chest, feigning a spell of weakness that required immediate attention. "My vinaigrette. I left it in the carriage. Miss Faircloth, would you—" "Of course, Lady Augusta." Calanthe slipped out, racing toward the library. She found Hadrian and Tamsin in the hallway, a leather satchel clutched in Tamsin's hands. "We found it." Hadrian's eyes blazed. "Hidden in the binding of the Merchant of Venice. Letters, account books, everything." "Lady Sibylla is coming." The servant's entrance. "Go." He grabbed Calanthe's hand. "All of us. Now." They fled through the kitchen, past startled maids, out into the alley where their carriage waited. Behind them, Calanthe heard Lady Sibylla's scream of rage, but they were already moving, horses' hooves clattering against cobblestones, freedom within reach. "Did anyone see your faces?" Hadrian demanded. "The cook, but she's always hated Lady Sibylla." Tamsin was laughing, giddy with terror and triumph. "We did it. We actually did it." Calanthe clutched the satchel against her chest, feeling the weight of her father's evidence, his final gift. "Now we rid it," she said. "And then we end this." The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Aldrich Faircloth's hidden papers revealed a conspiracy that stretched back years. The shipping company had been infiltrated by a smuggling ring, moving not goods, but people. Desperate souls fleeing poverty, sold into servitude, or worse across the Atlantic. The profits were staggering, the cruelty industrial. At the center of it all was Lord Cornelius Ashford, Lady Sibylla's lover before her marriage, still her partner in crime after it. He had used Aldrich's legitimate business as cover for his operation, eliminating both Aldrich and Edmund Vane when they threatened to expose him. Lady Sibylla had been his instrument. The marriage, the manipulation, the careful dismantling of Calanthe's life, all designed to gain control of any evidence Aldrich might have gathered. The authorities received the evidence within a week. Lord Ashford was arrested at his country estate, dragged from his bed in the early hours, while society watched in horrified fascination. Lady Sibylla fled to the continent, but was apprehended in Calais, her trunks full of jewels stolen from both marriages, her protestations of innocence convincing no one. Venetia, it emerged, had known nothing. She was guilty only of vanity and willful blindness, crimes that society would punish more thoroughly than any court. And through it all, Calanthe stood at Hadrian's side. The scandal was immense, the gossip unending, but Lady Augusta managed the narrative with ruthless precision. The Duke of Vexley and Miss Faircloth were portrayed not as conspirators, but as crusaders. Brave souls who had risked everything to uncover a terrible truth and bring justice to the innocent. By the time the season ended, Calanthe Faircloth was the most talked about woman in London. The Sinclair Ball was the event of the summer, and Calanthe dressed for it in a gown of deep crimson silk that made her look like a flame. Her hair had grown in the weeks since Lady Sibylla's arrest, still short, but no longer jagged. She wore it proudly now, adorned with rubies that Hadrian had presented her that morning. A gift, he'd said, clasping the necklace around her throat. For the woman who taught me to feel again. The rubies are too much. Nothing is too much for you. He'd kissed her then, the kiss of a man who no longer feared what he felt. Nothing will ever be enough. Now, standing at the top of the Sinclair ballroom staircase, Calanthe felt the weight of 100 watching eyes. But this time, they weren't watching to judge. They were watching in admiration. Hadrian appeared at her side, striking in evening clothes, his gray eyes warm with love. Ready? Terrified. Good. Terror keeps us sharp. He offered his arm. Shall we scandalize them one more time? They descended together, and the crowd parted before them. Whispers followed, but the tenor was different now. Not mockery, but fascination. The Duke of Vexley and his future Duchess, the woman who had unmasked a murderer and won the heart of London's most unavailable man. The waltz began. Hadrian swept her onto the floor, holding her closer than was strictly proper, his hand warm against her waist. I've been thinking, he said as they turned through the dance. Dangerous habit. Apparently so. He smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed his face. I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership, about building something together. And I don't want to wait anymore. He pulled her closer still, until his lips brushed her ear. Marry me. Calanthe's heart stopped. Hadrian. I know it's sudden. I know we've only known each other 2 months, but I've spent 2 years feeling nothing, and every moment with you has been more alive than all of those empty days combined. His voice shook. I don't want to wait for the proper time, the proper circumstances, and the proper anything. I want you. Now. Forever. The waltz swirled around them, but Calanthe couldn't hear the music anymore. All she could hear was her own heart pounding, her own breath catching, and her own voice saying, yes. Hadrian's face transformed. The joy that broke through was blinding, radiant, the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. He kissed her right there, in the middle of the Sinclair ballroom, in front of 200 witnesses and every gossip in London. Scandalized gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass. Lady Augusta made a sound that might have been despair or triumph. But Calanthe didn't care. She was home. 6 months later, The gardens at Ashworth Manor were wild with roses. Calanthe walked among them, her fingers trailing over petals that bloomed every color. Crimson and gold and white and pink. She'd planted them herself, cuttings from her mother's garden that had survived Lady Sibylla's neglect, now thriving in soil that had seen so much sorrow and was finally learning joy again. "You're going to ruin that dress." She turned to find Hadrian watching her from the terrace, his expression soft with love. "I don't care about the dress." "I know. That's why I love you." She crossed the garden to join him, taking his hands in hers. The wedding ring on her finger still felt new, still made her heart skip every time she noticed it. "Your aunt sent a letter. She wants us in London for the Ashford trial." "Does she?" "Apparently they're calling me as a witness. Lady Augusta says I should wear something severe. Grief-adjacent but triumphant, she called it." Hadrian laughed, that real laugh she'd worked so hard to earn. "She's terrifying. She's effective. There's a difference." They stood together, looking out over the gardens and the lake beyond. The same lake where he'd tried to run from her, from himself, from everything that mattered. The same lake where she'd found him and refused to let go. "I found something today," Hadrian said quietly, "in my father's study." He handed her a small leather journal, worn with age. "His diary. From the year he met your father. I thought you might want to read it." Calanthe opened it carefully, and her breath caught. The pages were filled with praise for Aldrich Faircloth, his intelligence, his integrity, his vision for the shipping company they were building together. But one entry stood out, circled in faded ink. "Aldrich brought his daughter to the office today. A curious little thing, all questions and bright eyes. She reminds me of Hadrian at that age, too clever by half, too stubborn to quit, too alive to dim. I told Aldrich that someday our children might meet. He laughed and said he pitied any man foolish enough to try to tame his Calanthe. I believe he's right." Tears streamed down her face. "They knew each other," she whispered. "They were friends. More than friends. Partners. Visionaries." Hadrian's hand cupped her cheek, brushing away the tears. "Our fathers would have loved to see this. Us. Together. Do you think so?" "I know so." He pressed his forehead to hers. "They set this in motion even if they didn't know it. Everything that happened, the tragedy, the loss, the years of darkness, led us here, to this moment, to each other." Calanthe thought of her father's watch, still tucked in her pocket, of her mother's roses, blooming wild and free, of all the love that had been lost and all the love that had been found. "I used to think my story was about survival," she said quietly, "about enduring cruelty and emerging unbroken. And now?" She smiled, her heart so full it hurt. "Now, I know it was always about love. Finding it, fighting for it, letting it transform everything it touches." Hadrian kissed her, soft and sweet, with all the tenderness of a man who had learned to feel again. Behind them, the roses swayed in the summer breeze, their scent drifting across the garden like a benediction. And somewhere, Calanthe was certain, two fathers watched and smiled, their legacies finally at peace. "Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more stories with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.